Tonight's entry is not about a man who snapped. It's about a man who planned. A man who didn't rely on rage or impulse or chance. H. Holmes believed evil worked best when it was organized, when it had walls, when it had doors, when it had places designed to look safe. Most killers leave behind scenes. Holmes left behind a structure, a building so carefully designed that people didn't realize they were in danger until the danger had already closed around them. This case is extensive, not because of numbers alone, but because of intention. Because Holmes didn't just take lives. He engineered the conditions that made escape feel impossible. What you're about to hear isn't a legend. It isn't exaggeration. It's a record of what happens when intelligence is divorced from conscience and patience replaces mercy. The building he created was called a hotel, but it functioned as something else entirely. A place where trust became a mechanism and architecture finished the work. This is not a short story. It's not a simple one. And it's not meant to be consumed quickly. Because H. Holmes didn't rush. And neither will we. This is the case of the Murder Hotel. H. Holmes liked watching people enter the building. Not because they were afraid, but because they weren't. That was the proof it worked. Chicago was swelling at the seams. The World's Fair turned the city into a mouth that never stopped eating. Strangers arrived by the thousands. Adults alone. Adults optimistic. Adults who believed the world was finally opening for them. Holmes stood behind the counter and studied them. He noticed how they carried themselves. Who looked tired? Who looked hopeful? Who looked like they wouldn't be missed right away. He spoke softly, smiled easily, made people feel selected instead of suspicious. When he handed them a key, he already knew which room they would get, not by number, but by function. The building was his body. The hallways were nerves, the doors were valves, and every room existed for a reason. Some rooms were meant to confuse, doors that opened into walls, corridors that bent just enough to break your sense of direction, staircases that promised an exit and delivered nothing. Holmes changed the layout constantly. Walls moved, passages disappeared, rooms became traps overnight. Even the people who worked there couldn't tell where they were. That wasn't chaos. That was discipline. When guests settled in, Holmes listened. Footsteps overhead, voices lowering as night arrived. The moment when confidence fades and isolation creeps in. Some rooms sealed perfectly. No windows, no drafts, no sound escaping. Gas lines ran behind the walls like veins, valves hidden where only Holmes's hands could reach them. He didn't need to be in the room. He didn't need to watch. He could turn a handle and let the building finish the conversation. When silence arrived, Holmes waited. He was never rushed, never frantic. The fair would still be there tomorrow. There was always another guest. Behind a concealed panel was the chute. Smooth, vertical, unforgiving. No stairs back up. No chance to scream long enough to matter. In the basement, Holmes became methodical. This was not where emotion lived. This was where efficiency did. He dismantled bodies the way a man dismantles machinery. What could be burned, burned. What could be dissolved, dissolved. What could be sold, was sold. Even death had value. Holmes kept ledgers, policies, invoices, skeletons delivered to medical schools that never asked enough questions. People think the horror is how many died. It isn't. The horror is how well it worked. Guests vanished, and the city absorbed it. Trains came, trains went. The fair roared loud enough to drown out absence. When authorities finally entered the building, they got lost inside it. Grown men walking in circles, opening doors that went nowhere, feeling watched by brick and timber. They found the rooms, the valves, the chute, the basement. They stopped counting early. Holmes smiled when numbers changed. Even cornered, he wanted control. He was executed. The building was torn down. But the idea survived. Holmes proved you don't need strength to destroy people. You need access. You need patience. You need a place designed to make escape feel impossible. Some monsters don't hunt. They build. And they wait for you to trust the door you're walking through. H. Holmes did not choose people at random. That is the lie people tell themselves afterward. Random feels safer. Random suggests chaos. Holmes preferred order. He watched first. Always watched. From behind the counter, from the stairwell, from places where he looked like he belonged. He studied posture before faces. Who hesitated in the doorway? Who looked around for reassurance that never came? Who carried their suitcase like it contained their entire life? He noticed the way adults lied to themselves when they were tired, the way hope made them careless, the way politeness slowed their instincts just enough to matter. Holmes listened more than he spoke. He asked simple questions. Where are you from? How long are you staying? Is anyone expecting you? Not interrogation. Inventory. He remembered answers, names, dates, plans that sounded vague enough to collapse without notice. People who spoke about the future in general terms. People who didn't leave addresses behind. People who believed opportunity was finally finding them. Holmes never rushed the decision. Some guests stayed untouched for days, even weeks, because desire without patience was sloppy. And Holmes hated sloppy. He tested them. Small inconveniences, wrong directions, doors that didn't open where they expected. He watched how they reacted, who laughed it off, who grew anxious, who apologized for being confused. Those were the ones he marked, because adults who apologize for their own discomfort will tolerate more than they should. Once he chose, the room was already decided, not by chance, by design. A room without windows, a corridor that bent just enough to disorient, a door that locked in only one direction. Holmes never needed to announce the danger. By the time the realization arrived, the building had already closed around them. That was the moment Holmes enjoyed most. Not violence, not death. The instant someone understood, they had been chosen long before they knew they were being watched. Control was never loud with H. Holmes. It didn't need to be. By the time anyone sensed it, it had already wrapped around them. Holmes understood something most people never do. Fear is unreliable. Panic makes mistakes. Control? Control waits. Once a guest accepted the room, Holmes slowed down. There was no rush now, no urgency. The decision had already been made. He knew exactly where they were standing at any given moment, which corridor they would choose, which stair they would trust, which door would feel familiar enough to open. The building answered to him. Every creak, every footstep overhead, every pause in movement when confusion first set in. Holmes listened, not casually, intently. He could tell the difference between wandering and searching, between annoyance and fear. He waited for the moment confidence cracked, that subtle shift when someone stops exploring and starts asking themselves if they made a mistake. That was his favorite moment, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. Control lived in quiet moments. Holmes never appeared when he wasn't needed. If a guest grew uneasy, he became reassuring. If they laughed it off, he withdrew. He adjusted constantly, like a man tuning an instrument. He enjoyed the waiting, the knowledge that the building was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Rooms sealed tighter as night deepened, light diminished, sound softened. Time stretched in unfamiliar ways. Holmes knew when someone tested a door handle, knew when they pressed an ear to the wall, knew when they stopped pacing and sat down instead. That was surrender beginning. He didn't need to force it. He designed it. Gas lines ran unseen, patient behind plaster and brick. Valves waited where only Holmes's hands could reach them. He never turned them immediately. He waited, because anticipation was part of control. The moment always came when the guest realized the room was wrong. No draft, no outside noise, no sense of direction anymore. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It crept in. And Holmes let it. He wanted them to understand before anything else happened. Understanding was submission. Only then would he act. A hand on a valve, a quiet turn. No confrontation, no struggle loud enough to matter. Holmes did not need to be cruel. Cruelty was inefficient. Control was clean. When it was over, he did not rush downstairs. He waited again, letting certainty settle. The building would tell him when it was finished. Holmes believed this was mastery, not over people, over space, over timing, over inevitability. That was the sickness at his center, not rage, not hunger, but the need to decide when another adult stopped being a person and became a process. In Holmes's world, control was absolute, and the building never argued with him. The realization never arrived all at once. That's what made it unbearable. It crept in quietly, the way a wrong thought slips into your head and refuses to leave. At first, it felt like inconvenience, a hallway that didn't line up with the memory of the last turn, a staircase that seemed longer on the way back, a door that should have opened and didn't. Holmes counted on that, because inconvenience keeps people polite. Politeness keeps them calm, and calm people don't run. The guest tried another corridor, then another. Each one felt almost right, almost familiar, like the building was rearranging itself just ahead of them. That was the second thought, the dangerous one. This place feels wrong. They laughed it off at first, blamed fatigue, blamed travel, blamed themselves. Holmes loved that part. Adults apologize for their own fear faster than they admit it exists. The door to the room closed with a sound that felt heavier than it should have. Not loud, final. They noticed the air next. Still. Too still. No draft, no outside noise, no sense of time passing. That was when the third thought arrived. I don't know where I am anymore. They tested the handle. Once, then again, harder this time. It didn't give. Panic wanted to rise, but Holmes had designed the room to resist panic. The walls were close enough to feel present, the light harsh enough to keep the mind busy, the silence thick enough to feel intentional. They sat down, not because they wanted to, but because standing felt pointless. That was surrender beginning. Somewhere else in the building, Holmes listened. He could tell by the rhythm of movement when pacing stopped. He could tell by the quiet when understanding arrived. He waited, because the realization needed time to settle. The final thought always came last. Not shouted, not dramatic, just clear. This wasn't an accident. That was the moment Holmes wanted. Not fear, understanding. Because once someone understood the building had chosen them, there was nothing left to do but wait. Satisfaction came quietly for H. Holmes. It always did. Not as excitement, not as pleasure, but as balance. The moment the building stopped changing and became still, that was how he knew it had worked. Holmes did not rush when the realization took hold. There was no need. The decision had already completed itself. He felt it in the silence, in the absence of movement where movement had been moments before, in the way the building seemed to exhale. He stood still and listened, not for noise, but for rhythm, footsteps that slowed, pacing that lost direction, breathing that no longer matched urgency. Holmes could tell when someone stopped looking for an exit and started calculating how long they could endure. That was the moment satisfaction settled in, because endurance meant acceptance. Acceptance meant control had become complete. He moved through the building without hurry, up staircases that lied, past doors that no longer mattered, along corridors that bent exactly as he remembered. The castle never confused him. It responded. Every space had been rehearsed in his mind long before it was built. Every turn accounted for, every delay intentional. He paused at the wall panel, not yet touching it, because anticipation was part of the reward. Holmes believed people misunderstood him. They thought he craved violence. They were wrong. Violence was just an outcome. What he craved was authorship. The knowledge that every sensation another adult was experiencing had been written into the building by his hand. He liked knowing that confusion had been scheduled, that fear had a layout, that silence arrived exactly when he intended it to. When his fingers finally closed around the valve, there was no tremor, no hesitation, only confirmation. He turned it slowly, not because it mattered, but because it was his to turn. Holmes did not stay. He never stayed. Satisfaction didn't require witnessing. It required certainty. He stepped away and let the building finish what it had been designed to do. Later, in the quiet that followed, Holmes would make his notes. Not about people, but about performance. What worked? What could be refined? Which spaces felt most efficient? There was always room for improvement. That was his satisfaction. Not the end, but the confirmation that the system was sound, that the castle still obeyed him, that the next decision would be even cleaner. Holmes did not feel finished. He felt prepared. H. Holmes believed legacy was built, not remembered. He believed numbers mattered only when they proved a system worked. By the time anyone began counting, it was already too late. The estimates came later. Dozens at first, then more. Some said 20, some said 50, others said over 100. The truth is simpler and worse. No one will ever know. Because Holmes did not leave chaos behind. He left absence. Adults who vanished into a city already loud enough to hide them. His methods were never emotional. They were architectural. Rooms sealed tight until air ran out. Gas fed silently through walls, controlled from elsewhere. Doors that locked only one way. Corridors designed to delay, confuse, and exhaust. A hidden chute that erased bodies from the living floors and delivered them to the basement. Below, evidence was dismantled methodically. What could burn, burned. What could dissolve, dissolved. What could be sold, was sold. Holmes treated death as inventory. Insurance policies taken out and collected. Skeletons sold to institutions that did not ask enough questions. Profit layered on top of disappearance. He was not caught because the castle failed. He was caught because he reached beyond it. Greed pulled him into insurance fraud, a scheme too large, too confident. Arrest came from money first. Murder followed later. When police entered the building, they did not understand it. They became lost inside rooms that lied and passages that folded back on themselves. They found valves, chutes, sealed spaces built to deny sound and air. What shocked them most was not brutality. It was planning. They said it felt less like a crime scene and more like a machine. Holmes confessed and contradicted himself with equal calm. Numbers changed, details shifted. He smiled when confusion followed. Even exposed, he wanted authorship. He was executed by hanging in 1896. Before it happened, he asked to be buried in concrete, afraid someone would do to him what he had done to others. The castle was torn down, brick by brick, as if destruction could undo design. But the true horror was never the man alone. It was the idea he proved, that evil doesn't need fury. It needs access. It needs patience. It needs walls that behave exactly as intended. The murder hotel was not a moment in history. It was a blueprint, a place where trust became a tool, and architecture finished the job. H. Holmes is gone. The building is gone. The brick was torn down. The rooms erased. The corridors reduced to memory. And still, the unease remains. Because this case was never about one man. It was about what happens when intelligence is allowed to operate without conscience, when patience replaces mercy, when people confuse order for safety. Holmes didn't rely on shadows. He relied on trust, on doors being opened, on the belief that evil announces itself. The true horror of the murder hotel isn't how many died. It's how easily it functioned, how quietly it worked, how long it took before anyone looked closely enough to see it. Buildings don't remember, but people do. And stories like this survive because they need to, not to frighten, but to remind that some evils are patient, some are polite, and some are designed. This file is closed, but the lesson remains. Until next time, sleep carefully.